Imagine walking into work one day, only to be accused of a crime you didn't commit. That's exactly what happened to Jordan, a hard-working assistant at a top tech firm. His colleagues whispered behind his back, threw suspicious glances his way, and before he knew it, he was being blamed for missing company funds. But what they didn't know was that Jordan wasn't just an assistant. He was the brilliant developer who had uncovered a major fraud scheme within the company. The very people pointing fingers at him were the ones guilty of stealing, and Jordan had the proof. As the accusations pile up and tensions rise, Jordan stays quiet, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. But when his own job is on the line, will he expose their lies, or will they succeed in framing him before he gets the chance? Stay tuned to find out. Jordan sat in the conference room, his heart pounding as his manager, Mr. Reynolds, stood over him with a cold glare. "We have reason to believe you were involved in the missing funds," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were reports, numbers, and vague accusations, but no real proof. Jordan clenched his fists under the table. He knew exactly what was happening. The real thieves were covering their tracks, and he was their scapegoat. Just weeks ago, Jordan had stumbled upon irregular transactions while working late. Curious, he had traced them back to senior employees, people who now acted like they barely knew his name. He had spent nights gathering evidence, preparing to expose the truth, but before he could, they turned the tables on him. Now, the walls were closing in. His colleagues watched, waiting for him to crack. But Jordan wasn't about to break. He was just getting started. Jordan kept his expression calm, but inside, his mind was racing. He could see the way his colleagues avoided his gaze, some shifting nervously in their seats, while others looked almost too confident, as if they had already won. He knew they wanted him to panic, to slip up and say something they could use against him, but he wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. "I don't understand," Jordan said, keeping his voice steady. "You're saying I took company funds. Do you have any actual evidence of that?" Mr. Reynolds hesitated for a fraction of a second before sliding another paper forward. "Your login credentials were used to access restricted financial records," he said. "The missing money was moved shortly after." Jordan glanced at the document. He recognized the timestamps immediately. That was the exact moment he had been investigating the fraud. Someone had been watching him, waiting for the perfect moment to frame him. Meanwhile, across the room, Rebecca, a senior accountant, sat quietly, tapping her pen against the table. She had always been polite to Jordan, but today, she wouldn't even look at him. She knew something, he was sure of it. But was she involved, or was she just too scared to speak up? As the meeting continued, Jordan realized he had a choice: defend himself now, revealing that he had evidence against the real culprits, or stay quiet and play along until he had enough to bring them all down. One wrong move could cost him everything. Jordan took a slow breath, carefully studying the faces around him. He could feel the weight of the accusation pressing down on him, but he refused to let them see any doubt. If they thought he was weak, they would push harder. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, meeting Mr. Reynolds' eyes. "So, you're saying my credentials were used?" he asked, keeping his voice measured. "Then you must also have the access logs. Did you check where the login came from?" A flicker of hesitation crossed Mr. Reynolds' face before he masked it with a forced confidence. "That's not the point, Jordan," he said. "The fact remains that you had access to the records before the funds disappeared." Jordan clenched his jaw. They were twisting the truth, bending just enough facts to make him look guilty. But he had something they didn't know: a backup of the original transaction logs, hidden on a secure drive. If he could just get to it, he could prove everything. Across the table, Rebecca finally spoke. "Sir, maybe we should double-check." Mr. Reynolds cut her off. "There's no need," he said sharply. That was it. The way his voice tightened, the way he avoided her eyes. He was nervous. And if he was nervous, it meant he knew exactly what Jordan had found. Jordan's pulse quickened. He wasn't just being framed. They were rushing to pin everything on him before he could expose them. He had to act fast, but one wrong move could make things worse. Then, just as he was about to speak, the door to the conference room swung open. A security officer stepped in, holding a company-issued laptop. "We have something," he announced. The last login came from an unexpected location. The room fell silent. Jordan could feel the tension shift. Someone was caught off guard. He just had to figure out who. The room felt like it had frozen in time. All eyes turned to the security officer, who held the company laptop like it carried the truth everyone was afraid of. Jordan sat still, but his mind was racing. An unexpected location. That meant someone had slipped up. Mr. Reynolds forced a chuckle, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What do you mean by unexpected?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The officer glanced at the screen. The last unauthorized access came from an executive office, one that Jordan doesn't have clearance to enter. A hush fell over the room. Jordan's heart pounded. This was the break he needed. If the login didn't come from his workstation, then someone else had used his credentials. But who? Then Rebecca shifted in her seat. It was small, barely noticeable, but Jordan caught it. Her fingers tightened around her pen, her jaw clenched ever so slightly. His stomach twisted. Was she involved? Or was she afraid of who was? Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. "That's unusual, but let's not jump to conclusions." Jordan wasn't going to let him twist this moment. "No, let's," he said firmly. "Because if my credentials were used somewhere I've never been, that means someone with higher access stole them." A flicker of something crossed Mr. Reynolds' face. Fear, anger, maybe both. Before he could respond, the security officer spoke again. "And there's more. We checked the timestamps against security footage. We know exactly who was in that office when the login happened." Jordan held his breath. He wasn't the one on trial anymore. The real culprit was about to be exposed. But just as the officer turned the laptop screen around, a sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, footsteps moving fast. Something was happening, something big, and Jordan had the sinking feeling that the people who framed him weren't going down without a fight. The tension in the room snapped as the door burst open. A second security officer rushed in, his face tight with urgency. "We've got a problem," he said. "Someone just tried to wipe the company's financial records." Jordan's stomach dropped. They were covering their tracks, right now, in real time. His gaze darted toward Mr. Reynolds, whose face had lost all color. It was him. It had to be. But before Jordan could speak, Rebecca shot up from her seat. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking. "We all know who's behind this." The security officer placed the laptop on the table and pressed play on the footage. The grainy video showed an office, an executive-level office. And there, hunched over a computer, was Mr. Reynolds himself, using Jordan's stolen credentials. The room exploded into murmurs. Mr. Reynolds' mask cracked. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "That could be anyone." But then Rebecca cut him off. "Stop lying," she said. "You told me to keep quiet, but I won't. I saw you log in that night. You made me cover for you." Jordan's breath caught. Rebecca wasn't guilty. She had been forced into silence. And now, with the truth staring everyone in the face, she wasn't holding back anymore. Security moved fast. "Mr. Reynolds, we need you to come with us," one of the officers said firmly. But just as they stepped forward, Reynolds made a move. In a desperate attempt to escape, he lunged for the laptop, trying to erase the evidence himself. The room erupted into chaos. Jordan instinctively grabbed the device, pulling it away just in time. Reynolds' fight was over in seconds. Security restrained him, his struggle useless. The weight of his crimes was too much to escape. As they let him out, Rebecca turned to Jordan. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jordan exhaled, feeling the tension finally break. He had spent weeks gathering the truth, and now the truth had won. But as he looked down at the laptop, a final realization hit him. If Reynolds had been so desperate to erase something, There was more to this fraud than anyone realized.